Welcome to California Highways Route by Route. This podcast explores everything about the numbered highways in California, from Route 1 along the coast to US 395 along the Sierras, from Route 8 in the south to Route 161 in the north.
Brought to you by the California Highways webpage and Gribble Nation.
I'm Daniel Fagan. I do the California Highways webpage at www.cahighways.org.
I'm Tom Fear. I'm one of four admins on GribbleNation.org. Typically, I am the one writing about California or pretty much anything related to the West Coast.
This is episode 4.04, Route 9, Pre-1964, Milpitas to Castro Valley.
So far in California Highways Route by Route, the first season of the podcast presented all the necessary background, the history of the state highway system, the numbering approach to state highways, the naming approach to state highways, and the organizations involved in the state highway system. If you haven't listened to Season 1, it is worth going back as it will explain a lot of terms, provide some really cool history. We were learning back then, so hopefully the sound quality is getting better as we go. Starting with Season 2, we've been going through route by route, all the numbered state highways. Season 2 covered routes 1 and 2. Season 3 covered Route 3 through 7, with a long exploration of the very long, sometimes tedious, Interstate 5. Each route, we discussed and explored the history of those routes, legislative routes with the number, the pre-1964 sign routes, and post-1964 routes, the history within various cities, the plans, if applicable, for freeway routings, the names used for the highways, plans and projects along the highway corridors. If you want to catch up on any past episode, we encourage you to go to our Spotify for Creators home at creators.spotify.com/pod/show, CA Route by Route, or our forever home at caroutebyroute.org and listen to the back episodes. We encourage you to like, favorite, bookmark, and share the podcast with your friends. Word of mouth is the best way to let folks get around the podcast. We do some sharing on social media platforms, but that's kind of standard. Doesn't really get us too far beyond the central part of the hobby. Sharing links to the podcast, talk about it with your friends, comment on the episode at either Spotify or CA Route by Route. Spread the word. It really helps people kind of find the road hobby in general, and maybe somebody knows how to pronounce Milpitas or Milpitas. I don't think we really determined what it is. Remember to listen past the credits. We often have a bit of freeform discussion about the subject of the episode.
In Season 4, we're covering routes 8 through 14. The first two episodes covered Route 8. The last episode covered the history of routes numbered 9 and focused on today's Route 9, from Santa Cruz to Los Gatos via Saratoga. Now, Route 9 was much longer originally, continuing from Saratoga all the way to Castro Valley. This episode, we're going to cover the pre-1964 Route 9. We'll do our usual exploration, covering the history of the route, the stories behind some of the names on the route, and interesting projects proposed for the route.
Some historical reminders from the last episode. The 9th State Highway was a route from Peanut to Kuntz, now Mad River. It is today's Route 36 from Mad River to 4 miles southeast of Peanut, and then Route 3 into Peanut. Legislative Route 9 was one of the longer state routes in Southern California, as signed Route 118 and later portions became Interstate 210. It ran from Ventura to Pasadena. As US 66 and even for a time US 99, it ran from Pasadena to San Bernardino. Moving on to signed Route 9. In 1934, signed Route 9 was defined as a route from Santa Cruz to Milpitas via Redwood Park. Between 1946 and 1948, the route was extended all the way to Castro Valley. In 1964, with the renumbering, Route 9 was shortened and changed. Shortened in the sense that the portion between Saratoga and Milpitas was dropped from the route. Changed in the sense that the end was changed to Route 17 near Los Gatos. In 1981, the start of the route was moved from Route 17 to Route 1 near Santa Cruz. And I don't think we ever found a resolution to what that actually meant, because it's always been signed to 1 in Santa Cruz as far as I know.
Yeah, we weren't able to find the resolution on that. Today's Route 9 is defined as from Route 1 near Santa Cruz to Route 17 near Los Gatos via Waterman Gap and Saratoga Gap, and along the ridge between the San Lorenzo and Pescadero Creeks. The last episode focused on the 1964 definition of the route, what I just read. This episode will focus on the former signed Route 9 portions from Saratoga through Milpitas and up to the Castro Valley. So let's talk about the legislative routes that made up the pre-1964 portions of Sign Route 9 from Saratoga. Between Saratoga and the Castro Valley, Sign Route 9 was made up of the following pre-1964 legislative routes. Between Saratoga and Sunnyvale, this was Legislative Route 114, defined in 1933 as going from Legislative Route 68, which was bypass US 101 near Sunnyvale, to the Los Gatos Saratoga Gap Road. That was redefined in 1935 as Legislative Route 68, which was bypass US 101 again, near Sunnyvale to Legislative Route 42, which was Sign Route 9. Between Sunnyvale and Milpitas, this was Legislative Route 113, which was defined in 1933 as Legislative Route 2, which was US 101, not the bypass, near Mountain View, to Legislative Route 5, which was Sign Route 17, near Milpitas. Between Milpitas and the Castro Valley, this was Legislative Route 5. This was part of the second segment of Legislative Route 5, which you may remember from our episode on Route 5, from Legislative Route 68, altogether now, which was bypass US 101, near San Jose, to Legislative Route 4, which was US 99, near Stockton, originally near French Camp via Hayward. This third part, the Legislative Route 5 part, was not only Sign Route 9, but it also included portions that were US 50 and that later became Interstate 5W. But this correspondence and the signage is confusing, especially when one attempts to relate them to the current routes.
Last time, we noted that in Saratoga, Sign Route 9 entered from the west along Big Basin Way, which becomes Saratoga Avenue in Saratoga. Before 1964, and what we care about in this episode, the route turned northbound along Saratoga Sunnyvale Road, which was Legislative Route 114, while Legislative Route 42 continued along Saratoga Los Gatos Road to Legislative Route 5, Route 17 at Los Gatos Avenue. We also noted the 1964 renumbering rerouted Route 9 along Saratoga Los Gatos Road to meet Route 17 in Los Gatos. Pre-1964 routing continued up Legislative Route 114 along Saratoga Sunnyvale and Mathilda to Mountain View, Elvicio Road, today's Route 237. This was originally signed as Route 85, which was defined in 1963 as Route 101 near Ford Road to Route 101 near Mountain View. So where is signed Route 9 in relation to Route 85? The answer is to think of the original routes as a triangle where US 101 is the hypotenuse and Route 85 is the rest. Bottom runs from near Ford Road north-south to Saratoga and side runs from Saratoga to Mountain View. With that view, looking at the 1963 state highway map, there wasn't a constructed route from the bottom. It was unconstructed Legislative Route 114, curving routing that met old Sign Route 9 south of Cupertino, what was then called Azul. The side was Legislative Route 114 running alongside Route 9, with a planned freeway routing running northwest at a diagonal from Azul to Mountain View.
This is really confusing when you attempt to map it to what the current Route 85 is, which is the freeway, because they never built the bottom part of it until they built the freeway. But the north-south part of it there is what eventually, or what was Route 9 and became Route 85. Sign Route 9 ran along Saratoga Sunnyvale Road, which was De Anza in Cupertino. In Sunnyvale, where Saratoga Road split off, Sign Route 9 veered to the west and continued along Mathilda, just past US 101, where it met the Mountain View Aliso Road, which became Route 237. And if you've been in Mountain View, you know this area well. This is that whole weird junction where US 101 and Route 237 come together at an angle. State maps do not make it clear if Route 85 was signed along former Sign Route 9 in 1964, although it very likely was for a brief period. In 1965, after the Route 85 freeway was completed between Interstate 280 and US 101, Route 85 was signed along Saratoga Sunnyvale Road between Route 9 and I-280. Interestingly, in 1968, the following was added to the definition of Route 85. Mathilda Avenue, which is part of Route 85 in the city of Sunnyvale, is hereby declared to be a city street within the meaning of sections 189 and 190, and is eligible for the allocation of funds for grade separation pursuant to section 190. The legislature finds and declares that although Matilda Avenue is presently a portion of Route 85, the Commission has approved an alternate routing. The Department has commenced acquisition of the property necessary for right-of-way along the new route, and Matilda Avenue will be returned to the city of Sunnyvale within a few years. Because of the heavy traffic congestion at the intersection of Matilda and the Southern Pacific Company's railroad tracks, it is necessary that Matilda Avenue be eligible for a grade separation allocation as soon as possible. So this seems to be saying, we plan to return Matilda to the city, but we still want to build a grade separation for the SP tracks. Route 85 signage remained on Saratoga-Sunnyvale Road between Route 9 and Interstate 280 until the completion of the full Route 85 freeway in 1994.
In Mountain View, Sign Route 9 turned east and continued along Mountain View-Alviso Road, which is today's Route 237. Before the current bridge over the Guadalupe River was constructed, it took a route into Alviso via Gold Street North and then 1st Street Southwest back to Alviso-Milpitas Road. In 1954, a freeway routing for Sign Route 9 was proposed. 6.8-mile freeway would avoid the circuitous route through Alviso and cut 1.1 miles off the driving distance. Plans called for an additional construction of a 2-lane highway between the Bay Shore and the East Shore Freeway. The highway would be raised sufficiently to avoid the periodic flooding the area was subject to. The route followed the existing highway except for 2 miles between Lawrence Station Road, today's Lawrence Expressway, and San Jose Alviso Road, today's North 1st Street. From Lawrence Station Road, the route would run almost straight easterly on a new alignment through open country to San Jose of Alviso Road. It cut across a southerly loop and eliminate a triangular course in and out of Alviso and follow a general line of the original highway from the San Jose Alviso Road to the East Shore Freeway just west of Milpitas. 2 curves near Coyote Creek and Bowers Lane would be eliminated. The 1964 definition of Route 237, which replaced Sign Route 9 on this segment, ran from US 101 to Route 17. In 1965, it was extended to Interstate 680. This was done because there were once plans to build a Route 237 freeway angling northeast from about Zenker Road, crossing Interstate 880 near Dixon Landing Road, and intersecting I-680 at Scott Creek Road. There's still a bridge at the latter interchange over pretty much nothing, and with sharp eyes you can spot the future Route 237 markings on the I-680 northbound. Note that the relationship between Route 17, which is now Interstate 80 in this area, and Interstate 680 was always a bit strange, and even stranger when one looks into the relationship between Legislative Route 69, which became Signed Route 17, and Legislative Route 5, which became Interstate 680. Essentially, Signed Route 17 ran along Legislative Route 5 until the East Shore Freeway was completed along Legislative Route 69, at which point Signed Route 17 was moved on to Legislative Route 69. So this is the Nimitz Freeway, if anyone's kind of trying to picture it. What about the signage along Legislative Route 5 at that point? Funny you should ask.
To understand the signage of Legislative Route 5, we now need a digression on Legislative Route 69 and Legislative Route 5. Legislative Route 69 was defined in 1933 to include a segment from San Jose to Richmond, which was the East Shore Highway. However, in practice and on maps, Legislative Route 69 merged into Legislative Route 5 in Warm Spring. By the mid-1950s, plans were underway for what would become the East Shore Freeway, which was also known as the Nimitz Freeway, between San Jose and Richmond. This is Interstate 880 and Interstate 580 today. But then, all of this was Route 17. The freeway was constructed in segments, and as those opened, they were Legislative Route 69. The segment from San Jose to Warm Springs by 1956, north of Newark to Richmond by 1958, with the whole thing being completed by 1960. Turning to Legislative Route 5. We've talked about Legislative Route 5 before, and what we're focusing on here, what is relevant, is the segment from Santa Cruz to Castro Valley. Legislative Route 5 took a different route out of Santa Cruz, going along Ocean, veering onto what appears to be Plymouth Street, El Rancho Drive and La Madrona Drive to Mount Harmon Road, although it's highly likely that the original routing is actually buried between the current Route 17 highway. It then went along Mount Harmon and Scotts Drive, merging back into the current highway routing. Old Santa Cruz Highway starts north of Inspiration Point, and the 1934 map shows that as a state highway, although it was bypassed by the current routing in the early 1940s. It entered Los Gatos along Santa Cruz Avenue, turning onto Main Street, Los Gatos. Main Street turned into Bascom Avenue in San Jose. Legislative Route 5 entered San Jose on Bascom, turned on San Carlos Street, and then north up Ray Street, turning east onto Santa Clara Street. From Santa Clara Street to 13th Street and then Oakland Road, which became the old Bayshore Highway today. And now, back to the story of what happened to Legislative Route 5 in this area where we have Sign Route 9. But first, we have one last digression regarding pre-1934 signage for the segments to discuss. In 1928, US 48 was signed in California, running from French Camp to San Jose via the Legislative Route 5 routing from Stockton to San Jose. In 1930, Legislative Route 48 was truncated to end in Hayward at 14th Street, and Legislative Route 5 was signed as US 101E between Oakland and San Jose. In 1931, both US 48 and US 101E went away, although some US 101E signage remained, and US 50 was extended to use Legislative Route 5 into Oakland, along what is today's Interstate 580. So much of the Sign Route 9 routing we'll see from Milpitas to Castro Valley is what was former US 48 or former US 101E. Now, back to the story.
So Milpitas to Warm Springs. Sign Route 9 originally ended in Milpitas, at what is now Sarah Way and Main Street in Milpitas, where it met Sign Route 17 and before the East Shore Freeway turned onto Legislative Route 5. If you're wondering what Sarah Way is, Alviso Milpitas became Calaveras, and today's Calaveras turned north from the original routing to a new railroad overcrossing, and Sarah Way splits off and ends at Main and the railroad tracks. Coming out of San Jose, Legislative Route 5 used today's Old Oakland Road, Main Street / Able Street in Milpitas Boulevard, and Warm Springs Boulevard. Thus, at Calaveras Boulevard, Sign Route 17 picked up and added signage for Sign Route 9. It continued, co-signed into Warm Springs along Warm Springs Boulevard. When East Shore Freeway was completed between San Jose and Warm Springs, Sign Route 17 was moved onto new freeway alignment together with Sign Route 9. Legislative Route 5 was left unsigned north of San Jose to Warm Springs. Of course, south of San Jose, it was still signed as Sign Route 17. Before the East Shore Freeway, in Warm Springs, Sign Route 17 headed northwest on Legislative Route 69 out of Warm Springs, specifically at Mission Boulevard. Sign Route 17 continued along Warm Springs, now Warm Springs Court, across the tracks to what is now Lopes, Old Warm Springs, and onto Fremont Boulevard. Fremont turns into Alvarado and then veers north onto Union City / Hesperian Boulevard. The route turned west at Llewellyn over to Washington, then up Washington onto 14th Street, which is now Route 185. This was all replaced with a freeway routing. Additionally, with the construction of the East Shore Freeway to the west of the previous Legislative Route 69, a short extension segment was added to Legislative Route 69, extending from the new Legislative Route 69 to Legislative Route 5. This extension became Route 262. Things got strange in 1964 when the Great Renumbering happened. The old Legislative Route 5 routing, which had been unsigned, became unsigned Route 17. East Shore Freeway Legislative Route 69 routing became both Route 17 and Interstate 680, with Interstate 680 following unsigned Route 262 into and out of Warm Springs towards Mission San Jose. Then by 1966, things got swapped again. The East Shore Freeway routing became Route 17 and State Route 680. The Legislative Route 5 routing became Route 238. A new routing was plotted for future Interstate 680 to the east, which is the present routing. This remained the situation until the early 1970s when Interstate 680 opened and Route 17 just became, just Route 17, until it was later renumbered as Interstate 880. That is also when Route 238 was truncated to start at Mission San Jose.
Returning to Warm Springs and the older history. In Warm Springs, Legislative Route 69 and Legislative Route 5 originally diverged at Mission Boulevard. Legislative Route 5 left Warm Springs along Mission Boulevard, now co-signed as Sign Route 9 and Sign Route 21 to Mission San Jose. As we just saw, the 1964 renumbering changed this. Notably, Sign Route 21 became Interstate 680. But the interstate hadn't been completed yet, so in 1964 the former Legislative Route 5 routing was re-signed as Route 238 into Mission San Jose along Mission Boulevard. In 1966, the planning for the current routing of Interstate 680 began, which curved around the Cameron Hills, while Legislative Route 5 remained on Mission Boulevard. Notably, this new I-680 alignment included plans for the Route 238 Mission Freeway, which was also known as the Hayward Bypass, which would have branched off at the center of the curve to meet Interstate 580 in Castro Valley. That freeway was never constructed, and it was the subject of a lot of lawsuits.
Originally in Mission San Jose, Legislative Route 5 continued north along Mission as Sign Route 9, while Legislative Route 108 continued north towards Sunol along Legislative Route 108 as Sign Route 21. In 1964, the Legislative Route 108 routing was re-signed as Interstate 680, or rather, future Interstate 680, and the Legislative Route 5 routing became Route 238. Sign Route 9, later Route 238, continued up Mission Boulevard to Jackson Street, where it met Route 92, coming from San Mateo across the bridge. At that point, Sign Route 9 turned northeast onto Jackson, which became Foothill to meet US 50 at Castro Valley Road. US 50 became today's Interstate 580. Sign Route 9 ended at this point. Mission Boulevard continues from Jackson as Legislative Route 105, becoming North 14th Street, which is today's Route 185. At Washington and Davis, today's signed Route 61 in San Leandro, North 14th rejoined Sign Route 17. This intersection is also the point where Route 238 turns and becomes Interstate 238 to rejoin with Legislative Route 69, which was Route 17 in today's Interstate 880. Route 238 would have continued to meet planned Route 61, which would have been an additional freeway from the edge of the Oakland Airport, where Route 61 currently turns to Route 84 near Newark. However, neither the Route 238 extension or the Route 61 extension were anything more than lines on a planning map. Pre-freeway, this would have been Llewellyn Boulevard along Legislative Route 228, defined in 1947.
Why did the longer version of Sign Route 9 go away? There are a number of answers. As you can see, there were a lot of twists and turns to follow this route. I mean, you went up what became Route 85, turned onto Route 237, then went up what was Route 17, which became Route 680, all the way up there, and Route 238 was in the mix. That's just a lot of twisting and turning going from north-south to east-west, and it was just better, logically, as separate routes. Further, the great renumbering really had its goal getting rid of all the co-signed routes. And as you saw, there was a lot of co-signing in the middle of the sole sign sections, especially with Sign Route 17 and Sign Route 21 along the Legislative Route 5 sections.
Most of the current names for these routes will be covered with the current routes along the path of Sign Route 9, such as Route 85, Route 237, Interstate 880, Interstate 680, or Route 238. There's one name of interest, East Shore. Why East Shore? After all, it's on the other side of the bay. It is on the Bay Shore. Answer appears to go to the original portion of the highway up to Richmond and El Cerrito, where the new freeway replaced something called East Shore Highway. The name stuck and was basically extended.
Turning to projects, as with the names, the current projects will be covered with their respective routes. Now, you might be wondering whether the Foothill Freeway, the Hayward Bypass, was ever planned as a Sign Route 9 freeway, and the answer appears to be no. It does not show on the 1963 state highway map And by the time the new routings show up in 1966, we're dealing with Interstate 680 and Route 238. So it was always planned pretty much as the Route 238 freeway.
Next time on California Highways Route by Route, we turn our attention to Route 10, look into the 10th route, Legislative Route 10, and the original sign Route 10. We'll also turn our attention to Interstate 10, which is a big one, a very big one. I'll cover that over 2 episodes, one focusing on the Santa Monica Freeway portion and one covering the San Bernardino Freeway portion.
For more information, visit the pages on Route 9, Route 17, Route 85, Route 237, Route 238, Interstate 680, Interstate 880, Legislative Routes 5, 114, 113, and 105 over on cahighways.org. Tom has a number of Gribble Nation blogs on this, one on Route 9, one on Route 237, the South Bay Freeway, one on the Legacy State Route 17, which had been at one point Route 13, the Nimitz Freeway, the San Rafael Bridge, and I-580. And of course, everyone's favorite interstate, Interstate 238, the interstate numbering abomination carved out of an otherwise mundane state highway. And my opinion, as always, they made it Interstate 238 to try and direct the trucks onto that interstate, as opposed to going up 580, which has a truck limitation. And as we're recording this, there were a number of articles in November 2025 about how Oakland is actually talking about finally getting rid of the truck limitation on Interstate 580, old US 50, and there's a bit of an uproar about that. Additional links will be on our show page at caroutebyroute.org.
As always, information on the episode is available on our website, caroutebyroute.org, where you can leave us comments on the episode. Spotify has added a comment feature, so you can comment there as well. The episode is available on our Spotify for Creators home, creators.spotify.com/pod/show/caroutebyroute/. Please remember to like, subscribe, and review our little podcast in your podcaster choice. It does help people find us. Remember, after credits, we often have a bit of freeform discussion on the subject of this episode, and I can think of one particular topic. Join us as we continue to explore California highways route by route.
This episode was written by Daniel Fagan and Tom Beer, edited and produced by Daniel Fagan. Our opening theme is I Like to Be by the Seaside by John H. Glover Kind. Episodes are recorded using Zencastr. Freeconferencecall.com is used for coordination. And this podcast is a product of California Highways at cahighways.org and Gribble Nation at gribblnation.org. So, Tom, what do you think about this portion of Sign Route 9, the portion north of Saratoga that totally got renumbered away in 1964?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I think this kind of was more or less a carryover. Nobody really knew what to do with US 48. When that was new, and it kind of just got extended in, through a couple designations to Sign Route 9 eventually. It's kind of hard to envision all of this, honestly, with how much the Bay Area has developed since the 1930s. You look at older maps in particular, like all these towns and communities, which are now interconnected cities, had a lot of land, open land between all of them. It's just a very, very different layout and very urbanized. So it's just very difficult in the modern sense to kind of envision what's all going on here. But a lot of it really didn't make sense regardless. There's a lot of multiplexing, a lot of 90-degree turns, and just weird routings that never made a lot of sense.
I think this is really the poster child for why the great renumbering happened. You have this route that kept having loads of cosigns, that kept changing directions, that just didn't work as a single coherent route. It really seemed to be different pieces. And so they fixed it in 1964.
Hitting on that, have we ever determined if current Route 262 out there in Warm Springs, I want to say, I don't know if we ever conclusively proved it, but I want to say that is the segment of state highway that has carried the most designations of any state-owned portion of road in California.
262? I don't know. I know it was 262. It probably had at times the Route 17 designation and the US 50 designation. only for part of it, not all of it, because part of it was this sort of weird
Right.
feature.
Yeah, it wasn't all of it, but yeah, just it's just this bizarre little short stub of a current state highway that just happened to have a lot of legislative routes and sign routes on it for whatever reason. It's just bizarre. And I remember when it came, I wrote a blog on that a long time ago, and that was like the topic of conversation that came up, is just like what was going on with this, and just not really even until a couple years past the 64 renumbering. It didn't seem like they really even got sorted out until they got to solidifying this 262.
And then I think it was only until recently that they actually signed it.
Yeah, I want to say there used to be a sign from southbound 680, and that was it. I haven't been out there in a while, so I don't know if there's anything on Interstate 880 yet, but it's just weird. Like it's a really important route. Like it's not like a throwaway or anything. Like it connects those two interstates, and it's like the most logical place to do it. But it's just very bizarre.
And speaking of those two interstates, just looking at the maps and seeing, especially in the early 64 period where Route 17 and the proposed 680 kept switching back and forth in the area north of Milpitas as things were getting sorted out between Legislative Route 5 and Legislative Route 69. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Also interesting is the whole history within Hayward, where there was a planned freeway in that area, and the city basically rose up against it to the point where now what had been the state highway in that area has been relinquished back to the city of Hayward.
Yeah, that's a whole interesting area with like 238, 92, and even 185. Like they functionally do not exist in surface streets in Hayward.
And admittedly, since I'm in Southern California, I do not know the Bay Area all that well, but I have driven through some of that area. And it's interesting, but it's just very different.
Yeah. In fact, 185, I'm honestly surprised San Leandro has never really pushed to get rid of it. It's basically has no on route signage whatsoever now. I actually have, I think, an original Route 185 sign. It is the most weathered sign I have in my collection. Like I have only one number sticking on it, and the rest have just peeled away. And even the California and the crown is just like weathered into something that very slightly resembling the word California. I've never really seen anything quite like it.
There were a number of freeways planned in that area because if I remember, wasn't there also Route 77 planned to go into the Oakland Hills, and it would have gone up and curved around and met, I want to say, Route 24, the one that comes out of the what used to be the Broadway tunnels, the Caldecott tunnels.
Yeah, and that's actually surprisingly, for that about half a mile that it actually was built, it has like a ridiculous amount of 77 reassurance shields. You don't see any from the freeway, but when you're actually on 77, I think you have like 5 on the route, which is really weird. So it's even shorter than the claimed shortest state highway, which is like not even close to being the shortest. 77 is actually the shortest that's signed.
Yeah, so lots of interesting stuff buried in this former Sign Route 9. Next time, we will start talking about Interstate 10, in particularly the Legislative Route 173 portion that became the Santa Monica Freeway, and that touches on things like old Sign Route 26, which was along Olympic Boulevard and Pico, and the whole connection in downtown Santa Monica, where you had Route 66 coming in and meeting US 101A. So it's just an interesting area down there, and we will explore that next time on CA Route by Route.